People like to believe guilt keeps the world in order, that when someone lies, betrays, cheats, or abandons you, they carry the weight of it later, tossing in bed at 3 a.m., haunted by their conscience. It's a comforting fantasy, and it's almost never true. The cold reality is this: most people don't feel guilty for hurting you, not because they're evil, but because guilt doesn't serve them. And human beings, despite all the moral posturing, rarely hold on to emotions that don't serve their self-interest. Machiavelli would laugh at the modern obsession with guilt. He understood power dynamics long before psychologists gave them names. He wrote that men forget more quickly the death of their father than the loss of their patrimony. Translation: people forget pain they cause if it doesn't cost them anything, but touch their money, their power, or their ego, and suddenly they care. Your suffering, irrelevant. This is why betrayal feels so shocking to the naive. You assume that if you would feel guilty for doing it to them, they must feel guilty for doing it to you. Wrong. Guilt is not symmetrical. It's not evenly distributed. It's not universal. Guilt is conditional, and the condition is whether the person's self-image or self-interest gets threatened. Think about it. A coworker steals your idea in a meeting. Do they feel guilty? No. They rationalize it as fair competition. A partner cheats and then blames you for being distant. Do they feel guilty? Not really. They flip the script so they're the victim. A politician breaks every promise they made during the campaign. Do they feel guilty? Please. They reframe it as the realities of leadership. In every case, the lack of guilt isn't an oversight. It's strategy. Humans are masters of self-justification. If hurting you protects their ego, advances their career, satisfies their craving, or secures their advantage, they'll rewire the story instantly. They won't say, "I was cruel." They'll say, "I had no choice," or "they deserved it," or "it wasn't that serious." This is the Machiavellian truth. Guilt is a luxury of the powerless. When you have no influence, you dwell on morality, because it's all you have. When you have power, even temporarily, you discard guilt because it slows you down. Machiavelli didn't tell rulers to be cruel for fun. He told them to be cruel when necessary, and to do it decisively, without apology. Why? Because guilt invites hesitation, and hesitation loses kingdoms. Here's where psychology backs him up. Studies on cognitive dissonance show that when people's actions conflict with their self-image, they don't change their actions, they change their story. The brain protects the ego first, not the victim. So when someone hurts you, they don't think, "I'm a bad person." They think, "I had a reason." The guilt evaporates in real time, replaced by rationalization. That's why expecting guilt is a losing game. You think their conscience will punish them, but conscience is flexible. It bends to self-interest, like metal under heat. The same person who cries about honesty will lie in a heartbeat if the stakes favor them. The same friend who preaches loyalty will vanish if betrayal serves their survival, and they'll sleep fine afterward, because guilt is only heavy if you choose to carry it. Most people drop it instantly. This is why breakups, betrayals, and workplace politics sting so much, not just because of the act itself, but because of the realization they don't even feel bad. You expect them to replay it in their heads, to regret it, to feel shame. Instead, they go out, smile, post pictures, laugh at dinner. That's not cruelty, that's human efficiency. Why waste energy on guilt when the story can be rewritten? And here's the dry humor. The very people who hurt you may even paint themselves as the victim. They'll say, "I had to," or "they pushed me to it," or the classic, "it wasn't as bad as they made it out to be." By shifting the narrative, they not only dodge guilt but gain sympathy. You're bleeding, and they're collecting pity points. That's not just a lack of guilt, that's weaponizing guilt against you. The cold truth: people don't feel guilty for hurting you because in their story, they didn't hurt you. They protected themselves. They did what was necessary. They acted on impulse. Or, they taught you a lesson. In their head, they're not the villain. They're the survivor. Sometimes even the hero. Machiavelli's lesson applies here. Don't expect people to act from virtue when self-interest is on the line. He advised rulers never to depend on loyalty rooted in gratitude, because gratitude evaporates the moment it conflicts with desire. Modern translation: don't expect guilt to protect you. It won't. So why does this matter? Because once you stop expecting guilt, you stop being surprised. You stop being blindsided by betrayal. You stop waiting for apologies that never come. You stop imagining that the people who hurt you are losing sleep at night. They're not. And once you accept that, you shift focus from hoping for their guilt to strengthening your strategy. Because in the end, power doesn't belong to the one who feels guilt. It belongs to the one who anticipates it won't exist. Let's get honest. The reason betrayal cuts so deep isn't just the action. It's the disbelief. You can't wrap your head around how they did it without feeling guilty. You replay the moment, searching for signs of hesitation, remorse, or shame. And when you find none, the wound multiplies. The betrayal feels worse because they moved on as if nothing happened. But why did you expect guilt in the first place? Because you were trained to. From childhood, society drills into you the idea that guilt is universal. Break a toy, say sorry, hurt someone's feelings, apologize, step on someone's foot, show remorse. Parents, teachers, religion, all reinforce the belief that guilt is automatic and empathy is natural. The problem, that's not how people actually behave once stakes and self-interest come into play. Machiavelli would laugh at the naivety. He argued that rulers should never build strategy on the assumption that men are moral. Men are selfish, unpredictable, and survival-driven. If you gamble on their conscience, you lose. Yet most people do exactly that. They mistake morality training for reality. They assume the co-worker won't backstab because that would be wrong. They assume the partner won't lie because they'd feel guilty. They assume the friend won't abandon them because we've been through too much. And then they're shocked when it happens. The error isn't in their behavior. The error is in your expectation. Here's the psychology behind it. Humans use projection as a shortcut. You know what you'd feel if you hurt someone, so you assume they'd feel the same if they hurt you. It's not logic, it's ego. You project your inner wiring onto others, forgetting that people are wired differently. Some people's guilt response is strong. Others barely register it. Some can't sleep after snapping at a stranger. Others can ruin lives and sleep like a baby. This projection bias creates a blind spot. You assume remorse will restrain people, so you lower your guard. That's why betrayal feels like shock. You thought guilt was a leash. It wasn't. It was an illusion. Take the workplace. You believe a teammate wouldn't steal credit for your idea because you wouldn't. You'd feel guilty and ashamed. Then one day they present your work as theirs, smiling. Everyone claps, and you sit there stunned. They don't feel guilty because in their mind it was teamwork or fair game, or just the way the corporate ladder works. They rewrote the script. Your mistake wasn't in trusting them, it was in trusting their guilt. Or think of relationships. You believe someone wouldn't cheat because you'd feel sick doing it. Your empathy would destroy you. So when they do, you wait for the guilt to show. But instead of shame, they get defensive. They blame you for neglect, boredom, or their need to feel alive. You're confused because you expect your conscience in their chest. That's the trap. This is where Machiavelli's insight comes in. He taught rulers to separate appearances from reality. People will appear moral when it costs nothing. They'll speak of loyalty, honesty, and values. But when desire and self-interest collide with those values, morality evaporates. Not because they're monsters, because self-preservation overrides everything else. Guilt is just a story the weak cling to. The irony is that guilt, when it does appear, is often performative. People apologize not because they feel deep remorse, but because they want to maintain reputation or reduce consequences. That's why politicians say sorry only after being caught. That's why co-workers issue non-apologies like sorry if you felt that way. That's why cheaters cry when confronted, but not when committing the act. The guilt is for show. It's a tactic, not a punishment. So why does believing in guilt make you exploitable? Because it keeps you reactive instead of strategic. You assume others will restrain themselves, so you don't prepare for betrayal. You assume they'll feel bad, so you leave your flank exposed. Then when they don't, you're not just hurt, you're unprepared. The truth is, expecting guilt makes you easier to manipulate. The person who betrays you knows you'll assume it was an accident, that they feel bad, that they'll make it up to you. They count on your projection bias to cover their track. And in waiting for guilt, you waste energy instead of taking action. Machiavelli's advice: assume guilt is weak, temporary, and unreliable. Strategy must be built as if guilt doesn't exist. That way, when someone does show genuine remorse, you treat it as a bonus, not a crutch. The reality is this: people don't operate by your moral compass, they operate by theirs, and their compass always points towards self-interest. If guilt threatens their survival, they'll drop it. If guilt threatens their ego, they'll rewrite it. If guilt threatens their advantage, they'll bury it. So here's the pivot. Stop asking how could they do this without feeling guilty. Start asking, what story are they telling themselves so they don't feel guilty? Because once you know the story, you know the excuse. And once you know the excuse, you stop waiting for remorse and start predicting behavior. That's how the powerful think. They don't wait for guilt to control people. They assume its absence and prepare accordingly. By now it should be clear. Guilt isn't the universal leash you thought it was. But let's get precise. Why is it that people can hurt you, lie to you, betray you, and then walk away without losing sleep? The answer isn't just they're cruel. It's psychology. Human beings have built-in escape hatches that let them dodge guilt in real time. Once you see these mechanisms, you'll stop being shocked by people's indifference. 1. Self-justification. The brain's defense attorney. When actions clash with someone's self-image, guilt should appear. But instead of saying, "I was wrong," the brain acts like a lawyer. It spins the story until the person looks innocent in their own eyes. Psychologists call this cognitive dissonance reduction. Machiavelli would simply call it survival. Example: a friend betrays your trust. They don't tell themselves, "I'm a terrible person." They tell themselves, "I had no choice. Anyone would have done the same." Or, "They would have betrayed me first." This reframing lets them live with themselves guilt-free. The betrayal still happened, but in their mind it was justified. That's why you'll never get closure by waiting for guilt to strike. The lawyer in their head already closed the case in their favor. 2. Dehumanization. Turning you into an object. One of the easiest ways to avoid guilt is to strip the victim of humanity. Soldiers do this in war. Bullies do this in school. Toxic bosses do this in workplaces. If they stop seeing you as a full person with feelings, they can hurt you without flinching. Think of it this way: it's harder to stab someone you see as human. But if you label them as the enemy, or weak, or replaceable, suddenly it doesn't sting. Machiavelli understood this well. He advised rulers to treat enemies not as fellow men, but as obstacles to be removed. Once the humanity is erased, guilt becomes irrelevant. This is why people who cheat call their partners clingy or crazy. Why people who betray friendships claim it wasn't real anyway. Why people who exploit workers say they're just staff. Dehumanization shrinks you from a person to a category. And it's easy to ignore guilt when you're not hurting a person, just a label. Projection. Making you the villain. Another classic guilt eraser is projection. Instead of admitting fault, they flip the script and accuse you. If they hurt you, they insist you provoked it. If they betrayed you, they insist you drove them to it. Suddenly they're not the villain, they're the victim. It sounds insane, but it works. The cheater blames you for being distant. The thief blames you for being naive. The liar blames you for being too sensitive. Machiavelli would nod at this. He wrote that rulers often shift blame to preserve their image. If the people suffer, it's the fault of corrupt advisors, not the prince. Projection protects ego at your expense. And here's the irony: the more you defend yourself, the more they double down. Because projection isn't about facts, it's about power. By recasting you as the aggressor, they not only dodge guilt, but seize the moral high ground. Suddenly you're explaining yourself, while they walk away guilt-free. Emotional detachment. Cutting the cord. The final psychological trick is emotional detachment. Some people can simply switch it off. They compartmentalize, wall off feelings, and treat the betrayal like a business deal. This doesn't mean they're psychopath. It means they've trained themselves to separate action from empathy. Corporate executives are masters at this. Lay off 1,000 workers. They don't feel guilty. They call it necessary restructuring. Politicians do it too. Bomb a city, it's collateral damage. By using sterile language and emotional distance, they buffer themselves from guilt. On a personal level, this shows up in cold breakups, ghosting, or ruthless career moves. The detachment is what makes it sting. You're drowning in emotion, and they're calm, almost robotic. But for them, detachment is armor. If they never connect emotionally, they never have to feel guilty for cutting the cord. Machiavelli understood this. He argued that rulers must sometimes act against compassion, against faith, against humanity itself, and do it with composure. Not because cruelty is fun, but because guilt slows decisive action. Emotional detachment lets the powerful move forward, while the weak drown in feelings. Self-justification, dehumanization, projection, and emotional detachment. 4 clear reasons why guilt evaporates so quickly. Each one protects the aggressor's self-image, while leaving you with the wreckage. That's the harsh truth. Guilt isn't absent because they're heartless. It's absent because they've already rewritten the story. You see betrayal. They see survival. You see cruelty. They see necessity. You see a wound. They see a clean slate. This is why waiting for guilt is pointless. The brain has too many escape hatches. The conscience bends. The narrative shifts. And by the time you're hoping they feel guilty, they're already on to the next chapter, convinced they were right all along. Machiavelli's wisdom echoes here. Don't expect people to be ruled by virtue. Expect them to be ruled by self-interest. Guilt may exist in theory, but in practice, it vanishes the moment it becomes inconvenient. We've already uncovered the first 4 mechanisms: self-justification, dehumanization, projection, and emotional detachment. Together they explain why guilt rarely sticks. But the mind has more tricks. People aren't just avoiding guilt, they're actively rewriting reality, so guilt never even enters the picture. These next 3 are some of the most insidious: moral reframing, selective memory, and shifting blame. 5. Moral reframing, turning wrong into right. One of the easiest ways to kill guilt is to flip the moral compass itself. Instead of admitting what I did was wrong, people reframe the act as virtuous, necessary, or even noble. Psychologists call this moral disengagement. Machiavelli would call it politics. Take betrayal. Someone stabs you in the back, but instead of seeing it as treachery, they convince themselves it was tough love, or for the greater good, or necessary to teach a lesson. A boss who fires loyal employees doesn't see himself as cruel, he reframes it as protecting the company. A partner who cheats doesn't say I'm selfish, they say I'm finally being true to myself. By twisting the moral frame, guilt is eliminated. They don't have to carry the weight of hurting you if they recast themselves as the hero. This is why so many betrayals are accompanied by condescending lines like, "Someday you'll thank me," or "It was for the best." Translation: I refuse to feel guilty, so I'll pretend I saved you. Machiavelli warned that rulers must often act against mercy, honesty, or faith, but the genius ruler reframes those actions as necessary for stability. In modern terms, if someone can recast harm as virtue, guilt disappears entirely. Selective memory, forgetting what inconveniences them. Another classic guilt eraser is simply editing memory. People remember what flatters them and forget what incriminates them. Psychologists call this self-serving bias. Machiavelli would call it convenient storytelling. Think of someone who mistreated you. Months later, they act shocked when you bring it up. "I don't remember saying that. It wasn't that bad. You're exaggerating." Are they lying? Maybe. But often they've genuinely rewritten their memory to protect themselves. The brain edits details to reduce guilt and preserve ego. This is why abusers minimize their actions. "It was just a joke." Why manipulators claim, "That's not how it happened." Why politicians insist, "I never said that," despite video evidence. Memory bends under pressure, and once the memory is distorted, guilt has no ground to stand on. Machiavelli warned leaders that history itself is written by the victors. Memory, whether personal or political, is always selective. The powerful preserve the details that flatter them and erase the ones that expose them. That's not carelessness, that's survival. So when someone claims they don't remember how badly they hurt you, they might not be faking. They may have truly deleted the details to stay guilt-free, which makes closure even more impossible. You're fighting ghosts in their head, not facts. Shifting blame, handing you the weight. The final guilt-dodging mechanism in this set is shifting blame. If guilt is too heavy to carry, people simply hand it to someone else, and the easiest target is you. Instead of saying, "I hurt them," they say, "They made me do it." A manipulator who lashes out insists you triggered them. A cheater insists you pushed them away. A backstabbing coworker insists you left them no choice. This doesn't just erase their guilt, it burdens you with it. Now you're carrying their weight while they walk free. Projection, which we covered earlier, is accusing you of their flaw. Shifting blame is subtler. It's making you responsible for their action. You weren't just hurt, you caused the hurt. And once they believe that story, guilt evaporates. Machiavelli would appreciate this tactic. He wrote that rulers often blame unpopular decisions on advisors or circumstance, never themselves. That way they preserve loyalty while avoiding guilt. Modern betrayers do the same thing. By making you the cause, they walk away feeling justified, even righteous. Moral reframing, selective memory, and shifting blame all share a core principle: rewriting the story. Guilt doesn't survive narrative change. If the story makes them the hero, the victim, or the survivor, guilt never sticks. And this is where the cold reality sets in. When you're waiting for guilt, you're waiting for someone to tell themselves a story where they're the villain. That almost never happens. People need to see themselves as good to function, so they twist morality, edit memory, or dump the blame until they can keep looking in the mirror without flinching. That's why it feels like they live in a different reality after hurting you, because they do. In your reality, they betrayed you. In theirs, they were justified. You're crying over the damage. They're congratulating themselves for making a hard choice. Machiavelli's lesson here is simple. Don't expect truth from people when lies preserve their self-interest. Don't expect guilt when reframing, forgetting, or blaming keeps them comfortable. Expect the story to bend. Expect guilt to vanish. That way, when it does, you're not shocked, you're prepared. We've covered 7 mechanisms so far: self-justification, dehumanization, projection, emotional detachment, moral reframing, selective memory, and shifting blame. Those explain why guilt is rare, but the last 3 reveal why, in many cases, guilt is impossible. These aren't just mental gymnastics, they're conditions that eliminate guilt before it even forms. 8. Power intoxication. When authority numbs conscience, power changes the brain. Neuroscientists have shown that people in positions of power display reduced empathy in measurable ways. Put simply, authority dampens guilt. The rush of control, status, and entitlement dulls the ability to feel the pain of others. This explains why bosses can fire hundreds without hesitation, why rulers can start wars, and why celebrities can exploit fans without remorse. They aren't tortured by guilt because power itself rewires perception. They see themselves as separate from the masses, above ordinary morality. Machiavelli warned that rulers must often act against mercy, faith, and humanity to keep control. To him, guilt was weakness. When someone is intoxicated by power, even small power, like control in a relationship or influence in a workplace, their conscience dulls. They hurt you not because they're blind, but because guilt is beneath them. Power gives them the illusion of moral exemption, and when you expect guilt from them, you're asking for a human response from someone operating on a different plane. 9. Entitlement. The belief they deserve to hurt you. Another guilt killer is entitlement. When people believe they deserve more than you, guilt never enters the equation. In their story, taking from you isn't theft, it's restoration. They're just getting what's theirs. This shows up everywhere. The spoiled partner cheats and says, "I deserve to be happy." The corrupt politician pockets money and says, "I've earned this." The selfish chef exploits your generosity and says, "That's what friends are for." In each case, the harm isn't framed as harm, it's framed as justice. Machiavelli pointed out that men are ungrateful, fickle, liars, and deceivers, but he also noted that they justify betrayal if it benefits them. Entitlement is the glue for that justification. If I believe I'm owed, then anything I do to claim it feels righteous. The victim may call it cruelty. The perpetrator calls it balance. This is why some of the people who hurt you smile while doing it. They don't think they're taking, they think they're collecting. And entitlement is one of the hardest illusions to break, because to the entitled, guilt isn't just absent, it feels absurd. 10. Transactional thinking. Relationships as ledgers. The last guilt eraser is transactional thinking. Some people don't see relationships as bonds. They see them as ledgers, tallies of favors, benefits, and costs. When they hurt you, they don't feel guilty because in their mind, they've already paid or balanced the books. For example, a partner cheats but thinks, "I put up with their flaws, so I've earned this." A coworker undermines you but thinks, "I've worked harder than them, so this is fair." A family member exploits you but thinks, "After all I've done, they owe me." Once everything is reduced to a transaction, guilt becomes irrelevant. Hurting you isn't cruelty, It's account. And since their ledger always favors them, because they're the one keeping score, they walk away feeling even with the world. Machiavelli saw this in politics constantly. Alliances, betrayals, marriages, wars, all justified by the balance of advantage. He noted that rulers who clung to morality instead of calculation lost power quickly. Modern manipulators play the same game on a smaller scale. To them, loyalty, love or friendship aren't sacred. They're entries in a ledger. If they paid, they're free to withdraw, no matter the cost to you. Power intoxication, entitlement, and transactional thinking are the final nails in the coffin of guilt. Together, they show why waiting for remorse is futile. You're not dealing with people who forgot guilt. You're dealing with people who never had room for it in the first place. The powerful believe they're exempt. The entitled believe they're owed. The transactional believe they're square. In all three cases, guilt isn't avoided. It's irrelevant. This explains why you can be bleeding from betrayal while they're smiling at dinner, laughing on vacation, or posting inspirational quotes. They're not weighed down because guilt was never part of their calculation. You expect morality. They expect advantage. The disconnect isn't in their conscience. It's in your expectation. And that's the Machiavellian truth. People don't govern themselves with guilt. They govern themselves with self-interest. If guilt serves them, they feel it. If guilt costs them, they kill it. Power erases. Entitlement justifies it. Transactions replace it. So when you ask, how could they hurt me and not feel guilty? The real answer is, easily. Because guilt was never in the equation to begin with. By now the pattern is clear. Guilt is not the invisible referee you thought it was. It doesn't govern human behavior. It doesn't hold people back. It doesn't balance the scales. At best, guilt is a passing inconvenience, quickly reframed, buried, or deleted. At worst, it never even forms. So here's the brutal Machiavellian lesson. Stop expecting guilt. Stop building strategy on the hope that people's conscience will restrain them. In politics, in business, in relationships, in family, the moment you assume they wouldn't dare because they'd feel too guilty, you've already lost. Why? Because guilt is irrelevant in power. Self-interest always wins. People will bend morality, edit memory, shift blame, numb empathy, reframe cruelty, or drown themselves in entitlement if it keeps them comfortable. Guilt is flexible. Advantage is solid. Guess which one they choose every time. This is why betrayals sting so much. You're not just shocked by the act. You're shocked by the indifference. You wanted guilt to punish them in your place. But guilt doesn't punish. It negotiates. It bargains. And most people settle the deal in their own favor before you even realize what happened. Think of it like this. People don't live in objective reality. They live in stories. Stories about who they are, what they deserve, and why they're justified. Those stories are weapons against guilt. If you're waiting for them to see themselves as the villain, you'll wait forever. Nobody wants to be the villain in their own narrative. That's why the cheater says, I had no choice. Why the thief says, I earned it. Why the liar says, you're too sensitive. They're not lying to you first. They're lying to themselves. Machiavelli would tell you to stop wasting time wishing people were ruled by virtue. They're ruled by need, desire, fear, and gain. Guilt is a weakness most people can't afford, and if they can afford it, they drop it the moment it gets heavy. Here's the irony. The people who do feel guilty often aren't the ones who harmed you most. They're the ones who play small, avoid risk, and over-apologize for harmless mistakes. Meanwhile, the people who wound deeply feel nothing. Why? Because guilt belongs to the powerless. It keeps them in line, compliant, hesitant. The powerful can't afford guilt, so they kill it at the root. So what do you do with this truth? You stop waiting. Stop waiting for apologies, for regret, for remorse. Stop wasting years hoping that someone somewhere feels the weight of what they did. They don't. And even if they did, it wouldn't fix the damage. Their guilt doesn't give you closure. Only clarity does. And clarity comes from this. Once you stop expecting guilt, you stop being blindsided. You anticipate betrayal. You prepare for selfishness. You predict rationalization. And you strategize accordingly. That doesn't make you paranoid. It makes you realistic. Look at the strongest players in history. They never assumed loyalty because of guilt. They assumed loyalty lasted only as long as it served the other party. That's why they built systems, leverage, and deterrence. Machiavelli advised rulers to make betrayal more costly than loyalty, because gratitude and guilt fade instantly. He was right. Gratitude is temporary. Guilt is flimsy. Self-interest is eternal. Apply this in modern terms. Don't stay in a job expecting your boss to feel guilty for underpaying you. They won't. Make yourself valuable enough that replacing you is more painful than paying you. Don't stay in a relationship expecting your partner to feel guilty for neglecting you. They won't. Set boundaries. Withdraw availability or leave. Don't stick with friends expecting guilt to stop them from using you. It won't. Redefine the terms of connection or cut them off. Guilt is not your protection. Power is. And here's the final irony. Once you stop expecting guilt in others, you become harder to hurt. You stop waiting for justice delivered by their conscience. You stop giving them the power to make it right. You start protecting yourself before the strike lands. You start seeing betrayal as predictable, not shocking. You stop being surprised when people justify, minimize or erase what they've done, because you already expected it. That's what Machiavellian thinking is about, anticipating the reality of human behavior, not the fantasy. Guilt doesn't govern people, advantage does. The sooner you accept it, the sooner you stop bleeding over betrayals that were inevitable the moment you trusted guilt to save you. So here's the cold thought to leave with. They don't feel guilty for hurting you. They never did. They never. And that's not the tragedy. The tragedy is that you expected them to. Once you kill that expectation, you stop waiting for remorse and start building strategy. You stop relying on morality and start relying on leverage. You stop expecting virtue and start expecting reality. That's when you stop being prey and start being untouchable.